all things that are hidden will be made visible.
Yes.
Something to that effect.
Right.
And then if we look in some of the other ancient literature, such as the Book of Enoch that was edited by Charlesworth, which is a very scholarly work.
Okay.
It says in there that at one time, for example, I guess it was at the beginning with Adam and Eve, the heavens were opened unto the third heaven, and that whomever was here could visit heaven. But then after the transgression in the garden, that was all closed up.
Okay.
So I'm thinking he's talking about frequencies.
Yeah, that's not far-fetched at all. It is believed that what actually happened when Adam forfeited his relationship with God, the enemy, Satan, took over his authority.
Yeah.
So we see that at one point, if you believe, as I do, that basically the enemy fell before the Garden of Eden was established with humans in it, then at a certain point, Jesus said that I saw Satan fall as lightning from the heavens. So he was kicked out of heaven, but lo and behold, God reestablishes all things, and he establishes this Garden of Eden. And we know that Adam was given charge over all things. It says in Psalm 8 that although man was created a little lower than the angels, all things are to be placed under his feet. So Adam had authority over the first heaven. He also had authority over the second heaven. And apparently he had access into the third heaven as well. The first heaven, of course, is the atmospheric heaven. That's the heaven on the earth. The second heaven, that's the starry host. That's the planets and galaxies. And then, of course, you have the third heaven where you're talking about. That's where God actually abides with his actual spiritual body, abides on what I call the planet heaven in the New Jerusalem. So we see that, and we see, sure enough, that the enemy, after the fall, has access into heaven. In the book of Job, chapter 1, for example, the enemy shows up with all the other sons of God in heaven. We also see at the end of the book of 1 Kings, when Micaiah has his vision, he's talking to Ahab, he talks about how the fact that there are demons up in heaven with the angels deciding who's going to be a lying spirit in the mouth of Ahab's prophets. So you see that these guys have access. Well, how did they get access into the third heaven if they were kicked out? They got access back in because Adam had access. And so you see that there are scriptures that you can tie into what you just said that corroborate with that. But yes, it ties into frequencies in every way. Well, how so? Well, we know that God, according to Psalm 33, created the heavens and the earth by his word, is what it says. And we also know that God stretched forth the heavens and fashioned the earth. It says in Proverbs chapter 8 that God, through wisdom and by wisdom and with wisdom is really the way it puts it, actually measured all things out according to what he was doing. And we find out in John chapter 1 that he did all these things by his word. That the word is God himself, and that by his word all things were made. And there's nothing that was made that was not made that was made apart from that word. Also, we find out in Colossians chapter 1 that all things visible and all things invisible were made by the word of God. And that word actually had an image, according to Colossians, I believe Colossians 1:15, and eventually, going back to John chapter 1, that word took on flesh and became the one that we know as Jesus Christ.
Right.
Okay, so what is this word? What are we talking about when we talk? Is there a scientific correlate to the word that we're talking about? Yes, there is, believe it or not. Acoustic frequencies tie into everything. Your entire natural realm in some way, somehow, ties into acoustic frequencies. You know, a simple illustration will do the trick, I think, to help explain what I'm talking about. Most people remember the little Memorex commercial. Remember that? Is it Live or is it Memorex, where the lady sings the high note and boom, bust the glass? Remember that?
Yes.
Okay, because of course the gag is, this recording is so much like the live thing that, we can play it and do the same thing to this glass that it would have done if the woman actually sung the high note standing there, right? Because we know what the commercial's trying to say. But are they tapping into a principle whereby they have somebody singing a high note and busting a glass? Is there really something to that? Can somebody really sing something so high and so strong that it actually causes the glass to excite to the point where it breaks? Believe it or not, yes, they can.
Yeah.
There is an actual principle in science called the sonoluminescence effect.
Now say that again.
I certainly will. It's called the sonoluminescence effect.
Okay.
Sonoluminescence effect. It's a fancy term. All it means is the sound light effect. That's really all it means. Once again, Farrell explains this in his book, The Giza Death Star. This is the first book in the trilogy where he talks about the sonoluminescence effect. He refers back to it in some of the other books. There are lots of other places where you can find it. I think if you research it on the computer, but I'm just trying to give you, one quick reference just to give you a sense of where I got this if somebody actually wanted to look it up. But the sonoluminescence effect was discovered by German scientists in between the world wars. And what these guys were doing, most people who probably are kind of informed know that the Germans were doing some very unusual experiments, to say the least. They had rejected the concepts of Einstein and what they call Jewish physics, the ideas of relativity, and they were kind of going off on a tangent, and they went back into some of the ancient literature to try to see if they could duplicate some of the effects of some of the ancient texts that were supposedly created thousands of years ago. And in the process of doing this, they came up with some very unusual things, some anti-gravity types of things and all this sort of thing. But one of the things that they came up with was the sonoluminescence effect. Now, what these German scientists were doing was that they were firing acoustic frequencies, sound waves, into water. And what they found is that when they tuned it just right, they could actually fire these frequencies into the water, and it would produce little water bubbles, little bubbles in the water. And when they kept doing it at a certain rate, in a certain way, it actually produced this bluish light when the bubbles burst. And they were amazed by it, to say the least.
Yeah.
Nobody expected that. So it kind of disappeared out of sight, but lo and behold, it pops up, I believe in the 1990s, sometime later, when some Americans kind of redid the experiment, and they tried to explain how this happens. What they believe happened was that the acoustic, since everything ties into frequencies, the acoustic frequencies, the sound waves, actually were in tune or harmonizing or vibrating with the molecules in the water to such a point that it caused them to resonate, kind of like when the lady hits the high note on the commercial.
Yeah.
What's happening is it's resonating or vibrating or oscillating is the scientific term with the actual glass, and it causes the molecules in the glass to excite to the point where they explode out.
Yeah.
So it's the same idea with the sound waves and the water molecules. What's happening is the blue light is believed to have occurred because what was happening was the sound waves were going into the water molecules and causing them to shake and vibrate to the point where they got so excited the electrons began to tear away from the atoms, and it produced a plasma, and that's where the bluish light comes from. It got so hot from the friction and the heat inside of the water bubbles that it actually tore away and turned into the very type of light that you see in a bolt of lightning.
Wow.
Pure, unadulterated energy released back into the atmosphere as a result of sound waves. Sonoluminescence effect. Also, you had a guy by the name of Vladimir Gavreau in the 1950s. He came up with a principle by the name of infrasound. Now, the idea behind sonoluminescence is that the sound waves are vibrating so high that it actually taps into the water molecules and bursts them back into energy. Well, with Gavreau, he found the opposite thing. Infrasound is basically sounds that are so low, that are so far beneath what you could hear that you really can't even detect them. They would be the equivalent of the seismic shocks of earthquakes.
Okay, question.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk about HD TV, and that, it's very curious why the government wants everybody to change over.
Right.
And they're talking about, there's been a lot of speculation on the internet and talk about the fact that they are going to use some kind of frequencies that will come across as sounds. You won't really hear the sounds, as
Right.
it were, but that it can have a great influence on your thinking.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I can it. When these guys, let me tell you a little bit about this infrasound. I think it'll help with what you're talking about.
Okay.
And this is also in this is in